Hey, everybody, it's Wednesday. Welcome to the Leadership Toolkit. My name is Mike. I'll be your host. As you know, each week we get together and we have amazing conversations with people all over the globe in all different facets of business. Today is no exception. I had the opportunity to sit here and visit a little bit beforehand with Dr. Rob Leone. He's absolutely a master of transforming workplace cultures through research back-end leadership strategies, people first systems, and high impact encouragement engagement models. Probably encouragement models too, just based on talking to him. Lots of smiles, lots of encouragement. He's a professor, a consultant, a keynote speaker, and he equips leaders with tools to create thriving teams in business. I am excited to introduce to you today Dr. Rob Leone. Dr. Rob,
Thanks.
or Rob, nice to see you today. Thanks for joining me, man.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be here with you.
Absolutely. Well, if you would, I always dive right in and we get started with, give us a little bit of your background. What's your background in leadership or entrepreneurship, business, consulting, all those things?
Sure. Out of college, I went into some junior leadership roles. And so I spent many years in leadership roles, cutting my teeth as a young professional, eventually having a staff of about 250, 12 direct reports. And then eventually I went on to continue my education, got my doctorate, started to diversify more. But my introduction to leadership was very instructional design and training intensive. I was responsible for not only managing and leading and supervising staff, but also, stepping them up in terms of their capabilities so that we could accomplish the goals we want to accomplish. Since then, relocated to different parts of the country, made some great relationships, built a handful of different businesses. And now at this point where I am today, my wife Angie and I own Black River Performance Management. And so I balance that with my teaching and research at Idaho State University. And the really cool thing about it is that what I teach at the university to working professionals, I get to transfer to industry and bring those concepts to industry. And as we know, when we've had classes with teachers or faculty members before, sometimes things don't scale well or transition well.
Sure.
But my aim is that we actually explore a lot of the gray area in life as it relates to learning, development, leadership, and performance. So that my ambition is that my students come out of our program with a real accurate, real sense of the reality of working with people, right? People are emotional, people are messy, people are dynamic, and these are all part of the things that make people very wonderful and beautiful. But we use, in master's level courses, lots of research, lots of perspectives, and we use models drawn from research. And so what I know is that that's what my students need in the classroom at that level, part of their career ambition and development. But in industry, they don't need the same things. They need a little bit more palatable, quick to learn and integrate tools. And that's why we've built out a number of different models and frameworks that are designed around things such as employee engagement, accurately diagnosing performance issues, motivation frameworks, a variety of different things that, you know, we talk a lot about culture and we pitch our work around culture, but my primary objective at the end of the day is totally performance, but not at the expense of the individual. That my ambition for the teams that I work with and I partner with is that they go home at the end of the day, they still have fuel in their tank, their internal fuel tank, so that they can be present with, whomever they want to be, whatever they want to be after work, whether that is to volunteer or to be with their family members, or, make it to the gym because they still have enough energy in them to do these things that really, they're discretionary time, the things that actually fuel them outside of work. So that's kind of the quick and dirty of what I do, but I feel very fortunate to be in this space and get to spend this time with you, Mike.
No, man, I think it's absolutely phenomenal. And I always sit here, I joke because my audience probably knows the top of my head better as I sit here and I'm taking notes so that we can talk about some of this. And you dropped a lot of really good directions we can head in our conversation today. I love the fact that when you're saying, "Hey, look, I'm a professor, but I'm teaching what I'm hearing," because I've experienced that. We've all experienced that, right? Where you have a teacher that teaches because of what they were taught and what they were taught. So you're grounded in theory rather than in reality. Is that a
Yeah.
fair assessment? And
Oh,
so what you're,
100%. 100%. And if I could just add right to
yeah,
what you're
yeah,
saying. So all of the courses in our graduate and undergraduate course are project based. So, we're context neutral, sorry, industry neutral, and the students bring the context to the class. But it's tough because life moves at a different pace than academia. So in some
sure.
instances, we run out of time because they have to finish the semester, or in other instances, the company they're working with is going too slow. So we have to take a little creative licensure of some of the content we do to help give them that experience to know what it's like.
Yeah, and I think it's really powerful that it's, the real over the research. And
Yeah.
it's funny because I remember my oldest son who's 25. Him and my younger son were talking, and I have one that's going to graduate here, and he says, "Dad, I don't get it." He said, and they're sitting having a conversation. Came to me and says, "Dad, here's what I don't get." He says, "We have this teacher that talks about all of this theory and business, and he's in high school, right? Business theory and so forth."
Yeah.
He says, "But he's never been in business." And he says, "So I listen to you. I listen to some of the stuff you experience at work and some of the things you've gone to." And the older one chimes in. He goes, "Yeah, that's not real life, man." He goes, "I worked for dad." And it's not the thing. And so I think it's really powerful the way that you're talking about that it's okay. It's one thing to be a student and learn theory, but where you're trying to bring that realness, so that they can actually transition and take action when they're moving into these other spaces. One of
Yeah.
the things that you brought up, I love the fact that you said, "Hey, at the end of the day, we're focused on performance." I mean, it's in the name, Black River Performance Management, right? I interviewed a friend of mine. He's a leader and a pastor, and we were talking early on, and I asked about, well, what are some of the measures of a leader? What are some characteristics? And he gave me a few. And the last one he brought up, he says, well, you have to measure results. You got to measure performance. And he says people skip over that in leadership because there's all these sort of things out there in the ether, right? So I'm curious, when you're talking about measuring performance and you're saying at the end of the day we're looking at what is the performance we're going to get. And I'm going to dive right into this question. Is there one or two or three things that you can say, "Hey, look, this is consistent across industry, across all these different industries on how we measure performance," or is there nuance in everything that you're coaching and teaching? Is it different across the board? So what's the same, what's different when it comes to performance management?
What's the same is that it's really squishy topics, right? So engagement, satisfaction, they're tough to put numbers on in many instances. My ambition is that companies that we're good stewards of funds, that these are investments, but there also has to be a level of understanding that, look, if you've never tracked data before, it's hard for me to turn around and demonstrate impact and change based off of what we're doing. But we could do that in different ways. And one of the things that the organizations really look to are attrition counts, right? Or attrition data.
Hmm.
And and I've been focusing more and more on the front end of the organization with clients lately, job fit, things like that, because you take a $60,000 a year salary, it might cost you up to $180,000 to replace that person between
Hmm.
a variety of things in terms of downtime, non-productivity time, searching, hiring search firm, all sorts of things, right? So it's really important that we're doing this in a way that we're retaining these people. But I had a question similar to this in the past. They're like, so let's talk about retention. How's your retention data? I was like, it's actually, as I think about it, in some instances, really terrible, but for the right reason, right? Because sometimes we have the wrong people in the team that are actually detracting and derailing the organization, so that we need to either help them step up and become a part of what it is that we're trying to accomplish, or
Hmm.
help them step out. And I don't take a lot of pride that we've turned over a lot of positions because that's not our intention. But our intention is to build cultures and communities within these teams that agree to certain values and want to be there together. And for those that maybe are squeaky or crunchy or not interested in playing in that environment, then they are welcome to leave, because at the end of the day, it's the organization, the ambition of the organizations that's creating the space for this community to happen. We're
Mhm.
getting this kind of wrong right now with this return to work stuff, in the sense of people trying to say, hey, look, I'm not coming back to, you name the company, right? I'm going to work from home. That's my desire. That's where I
That's
want to
my
be.
jam.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, well then go find a job that lets you do that. I don't mean to sound cold and heartless as it relates to this, but the organization is creating the opportunity for us to make a living, creating an opportunity. It's the petri dish that all these people play in and exist in. And so what we're trying to do is just influence those conditions. And we do that. We approach organizations this way. We're industry agnostic, but context specific. And so, to your
Sure.
question, what's different between industries? There's a really low variability among industries, because people in many instances. They have their
Love that.
culture and their flavor that we work with. But in terms of tracking data, let's start with performance outcomes. What are those data that you're already currently tracking in the organization? And let's determine what the deficiencies are. And then from there, we determine what's contributing to those deficiencies so that we could get our handle on that. So if I could do a good diagnosis and a deep enough dive, I could determine what those things are. We can always build the solution. That's one thing we're really good at. It doesn't matter whose plan it is. We know how to build the solution and implement it to hit those targets in the end. And so that's how we approach this. And now, if organizations don't have real data to support where they're at, but they know things have to change, because at a gut level, things could be better or should be better, or you want them to be better. We look with
Sure.
that too. And we have these open conversations about what they want to accomplish. What does that look like for them? And then we move forward and build a plan together. And the idea is that it's a partnership. It's
Mhm.
not a training initiative. We'll come in and do training to baseline the culture, to figure things out, um, to upskill in certain areas, to integrate our tools. But a lot of this is work outside of that. It's you and me, Mike. We're gonna have calls regularly. Let's see what's still not working. What are those sticky things that we need to push through or revisit how to do it? And that's how we approach it. So really unique though to who you are as both the leader and that particular organization. So what I've done with a mining company is not going to work with the healthcare company, and it's not going to work in higher ed, because the people are different. The context is different as it relates to the culture and the systems within those. But at the end of the day, people are people, right? So if you can learn how
Sure.
to read people, you can learn how to predict behavior and styles and things like that. We can help leaders become more effective in moving their people in the directions that they need to go.
I love the responses you shared. And there's a couple things I always try and recap, right? So one,
Yeah.
I want to make sure I'm hearing it
Good
properly.
luck.
Secondly, is no, I love it, man. And secondly, though, as people are either watching the show with us, or if
Yeah.
you're, listening on a podcast later, part of what I repeat is because it's like, to me, I think I get so much value from having these conversations, Rob. And I hope that others do too. And I'm like, oh, you got to write that thing down. You need to write this down, right? You need to bring that
Yeah.
up. So one of the things there's one I want to clarify, because you said, hey, when we talk about attrition data, you're talking about attrition for employees. We're not talking about attrition data like of losing customers or market share loss or whatnot. You're primarily talking staff within the company and so forth. Is that fair?
Yeah, but we're open to that other conversation too. We got to
Okay.
look at where we're tracking information to determine how to demonstrate impact, right?
Absolutely. And then one of the things that I think is always brought, and I've talked to more and more people that are in leadership and consulting roles, especially in probably the last year, that do bring up data. And when we talk about data, there's still it was like when we were talking about being out in the ether earlier, and you were talking about squishy topics. That was your words. You said, well, we get these
Yeah.
squishy squishy topics of things like, how do you measure engagement? How do you measure attitude? I did a keynote years ago that was, how do you measure leadership? Like, what's the measurement? What's the
Yeah.
KPI for leadership? And
Yeah.
so it's one of those things. How do you distill that down and determine, okay, well, because I think data is one of those things. If you and I are talking and we say, okay, here's what we're going to measure. We're going to measure employee turnover rate. And that's a data point, right? On how long were they here? What did we do to train them and so forth? And we get very specific on that. But I think data as a whole, it can become one of those squishy topics because it's so
Mhm.
big. So
And are
do
you
you,
measuring the right things too, right? There's another aspect of
correct?
that too. Just because you're checking your attrition and you're doing your exit interviews doesn't mean you're actually capturing the correct information to help you make those changes you need to make.
Well, and a lot of times, especially if somebody's going on an exit interview, they're just giving you the canned answer because they're like, dude, can I just get my things and my check and
Yeah.
go, please?
Yeah.
I don't need to be here and be dressed down anymore. Like
Yeah.
many people have been in that position where you're like, okay, I'm done having the conversation. Can I get what I need and move on? So are you really getting accurate information? So do you have some tips on, okay, let's say I've decided to measure this data point. I've decided to measure, length of tenure of my staff and so forth, or whatever it may be. How do I know? How often should I go back and revisit that data to determine, hey, this is a good point as a leader. This is something that's valuable to me that I should continue tracking, or how do you make those determinations over time? I guess would be my question.
Well, one of the questions is what's the relationship between what it is you're managing and what it is you're hoping to capture and accomplish, right? So sometimes you're right. We just like tenure might be a very unnecessary measure, especially if I want, depending on my organization, right? So let's say we're innovation centric. Tenure might not be the best measure for that because if we have people in the seats too long and they're not current with the evolution of whatever that is, let's use like the concept of information systems, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
that stuff's by the time you learn the new system, it's almost like we have to move to the next system because it's constantly being refined and improved. So to me, it really is, and this is why I do a lot of strategic planning and then large group facilitation is like, what is it that you really want to accomplish? And then how do we build the metrics around that? And what is it that you're already doing if you're doing something that's awesome? And is it leading you to what it is that you're hoping to understand? Because there's a couple different factors here. One of the factors, in my opinion, is isolation. Are we structuring our data collection in a way that we can truly isolate the variables that will be revealing to us to help us understand what's leading to this or what's not leading to that?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes systems are inherited, right? And so, Mike, if I come in after you and you built a system and I'm just continuing to plug along with it and doing the annual survey and whatever it is,
Sure.
there's a level of wisdom that leaves with you as you read that data that might not be in my wheelhouse at all, right? And so we need to be very purposeful with having these conversations. The tough thing that I run into is that people are like, well, we're just too busy. Like we have too much going on. You just get an hour, or we'll just do this, or this is good enough. And how do you combat an attitude like that? Our opinion is that you can't afford not to slow down to really do a check-in terms of what is it that we're looking at and is it truly accomplishing what it is? And that's just not data. That's policies, that's procedures, that's practices, right?
It's
But
people.
if you're, yeah, it's people. Are we hiring the right people now for what it is that we want to accomplish versus pre-COVID when the terms were different, right? So there's a lot of benefit to like these retreat and work and work sessions that let us step away from the day-to-day, very linear processing of how we do things to start throwing ideas against the wall, impressions, observations, stuff like that, and then determine what are our data sources that relate to this, and where do we go from here? If you're not doing certain types of surveys, internal surveys and questionnaires, whether it's 360 degrees with leaders or any number of these things, you might be missing some good data points, right? Like,
Sure.
Mike, if you're my supervisor and I know stuff's going on, if we don't have a good relationship, if I don't really feel like you got my back, I'm probably going to sit here quietly and not share these things to put them on your radar because I don't feel safe with you, right? And so there's all these different dynamics that are in play, and we have to get a handle on essentially our organizational health and well-being to move forward to use any of this information. Not to mention the byproduct of this is enhanced quality of culture and rapport. So now, because I know you got my back, I'll share some things with you
Sure.
because you're looking out for me.
Well, and I think that that part of that synergistic relationship or symbiotic relationship where we
Yeah.
are able to have that exchange is super powerful in business. And I think for a little while people got really scared of that because it's like, oh, you got to stay quote unquote professional and fit in these HR guidelines and so forth. And it's like, yeah, I'm not that guy. So
You're
hey,
not, you're
before
underserving the person in many instances.
Abs- absolutely. Then all you're doing is you're fitting in these guidelines to check the boxes instead of
Yeah.
serving the people. And as a leader, you're there to serve the people. That's how you grow.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
couple of quick things because I
Yeah.
we get into these and then I'm like, hey, halfway through. And by the way, for anybody, and I've put this up on the screen a couple of times, but if anyone would like to connect with Dr. Rob Leon, first off, you can check out his website. It's blackriverpm.com/Rob is a great place to go. He said there's links to the podcast, links to connect with him, all the information. So Black River Performance Management, it's blackriverpm.com. And then also you could, if you wanted to get more personal, email rob@blackriverpm.com or certainly connect on LinkedIn. Everybody on LinkedIn, and I checked there. It's Robert Leon is the link. So linkedin.com/n/ROBERTLION, spelled like lion, right? Which I think is awesome. But Robert Leon. So I would definitely encourage you to connect there. Couple tidbits I want to hit on
Yeah.
that I love that you said. One, I love the fact that, and I think this is one of those things leaders shy away from, is the fact that sometimes we have to help people out. Sometimes you have the right person in the wrong seat. Like I'm not devaluing the human behind, that's there doing the thing, but you said, we either have to help them up, we have to train them, we got to move them forward, or sometimes we got to help them out. And I think people need to take note of that. If you're questioning that, you have those three, what is it? The three T's in business, right? You got to train them and invest. You got to transfer them if they're in the wrong seat, or you got to terminate them. And that's a more
Yeah.
harsh way to say it, but it's the three T's that we've always gone by. Also, one of the things, because I even asked early on, and I meant to hit on this earlier, but I would encourage people to write it down because anybody in a leadership role, Rob said a couple things that are super valuable. One, he said, I think these retreats and you step out and it gives you a different view. He also commented that the very first thing, because I was talking about data and squishy metrics and so forth. And he says, well, the first thing I got to do is diagnose what's going on. And I think those 2 points, again, not necessarily in that order, are super, super valuable from a leadership and business standpoint. Because so often as a leader, we go in all full of fire in our belly and man, I got
Mhm.
this move and I'm going to go in and let's go and I'm going to do it this way. And you brought up the point, Rob, that like, okay, say you've got this process that's sort of working and I'm going to adopt that process, or you have people that come in and go, clear it off the table. I got this whole new process and it's going to be awesome and we're going to do it. But we haven't taken the time to listen to why this process does or doesn't work. We haven't taken the time to diagnose the stuff. We sometimes then we get into it for a year or 2 years or 5 years and we don't take the time to back out into the, like what you're talking about. You go to these work retreats, you connect with people on a human level, you can see from further away the forest for the trees, so to speak, right?
Mhm.
You can see those different processes. So I would encourage people to for sure write those 2 points down. Like diagnose the situation, whether you're someone who's been in leadership for a while
Mhm.
or you're coming into that space. Diagnose what's going on first, and then do take the time. We get so busy working in the business that we
Mhm.
rarely in leadership roles take time to work on the business. And I remember one last comment here that I'm picking up, and this is sort of like what you were saying is okay, we adopt this process and so the person just carries it forward. There's an author from the automotive industry, his name's Dave Anderson, and he says 7 words that'll kill business. We've always done it that way before.
Yeah. Right.
And so you go, well, that was what was working, so that's what we do. Uh, so I'm curious because one of the last things that you said, sometimes you get people that when we're doing it that way, well, we're too busy to change, man. Rob, we have so much going on. We got 60 hours of work and a 40-hour work week, and I don't know how you want me to do it. Or the
Yeah.
other thing that I keyed in on was you said you have somebody that's doing just good enough. How do you address that, either within your own company or coming in from a consultant point of view, when someone has a just good enough attitude?
Uh, yeah, there's so many things that I kind of want to respond to that relate to this and relate to what you
Take
brought up
whichever one,
already.
man. My brain goes like this all over. Just bring it in.
Can you hold that question and we'll come right back to that because I want to go back to
Yes.
diagnosing real quick. There's a couple things I think people should acknowledge. One, leaders are probably sometimes not in the best spot to diagnose
Mm.
because they are sometimes too close to the issue and they're observing. They're accurate in the understanding that they know there's a performance problem, but where they're often inaccurate is knowing what the source of the performance problem is. And that's why we've developed certain models. Those are the classes I teach. And so if you are going to go at it yourself, pull your team in, do some
Love
surveys, do
it.
some focus groups, get a little bit deeper. Actually, in fact, go in and grab our peak performance model and run it through that. Because the idea is to bring it deeper into, is this a person issue? Is this a system issue? Is this a culture issue? Right. So um, there's that piece. I
Well,
also want to,
if I can
okay,
add
go.
on there,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I met, dude, I love it because so often when you're saying, hey, sometimes the leader can't diagnose it themselves, it's because it's your process that created the problem. Well, I came up with this. It's my idea. It's great. And so you can't see it. That's what went through my head is I have been so guilty of that where I'm like, dude, I have this cool 10-step process. It's all laid
Yeah,
out. We're going to crush it. This is awesome. And people are going, this is stupid. It doesn't work. And I'm like, no, it does. In my head, it
yeah,
works right here.
yeah.
Right. So
Or
no.
we create processes or we have systems, but we don't have the skills necessary to ensure that. Think about, remember the little kid bowling, the
Yep.
gutter,
Yep.
what are they called? Gutter guards or whatever. Leaders and employees and people in general just have to have a full tool set of skills to be really successful in life, right? Let's use accountability as an example, or difficult conversations. It's the biggest deficiency in organizations. I'll tell you that the vast majority of problems, once you diagnose it, are tied to accountability or lack thereof, conversations that aren't happening because we don't want to hurt each other's feelings or some other reason about that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really important to understand that. I wrote a blog once because this came out of one of our workshops. We had all these people talking about their values, which were in direct violation of the performance issues that were occurring in the organization.
How do
They
you
were
mean?
saying we value accountability, we value communication. I had a group full of people saying this, but I look at the performance issues, and it's because while they value it, they don't have the skills to do it, so they weren't doing
Mm.
it. And so it's one of those tricky things that we never really hear people talking about. Do I have the skills to live according to the values or beliefs I have? Right? There's a lot to unpack here, right? You mentioned something earlier about, look, I don't have time to do this. So I was doing a goal workshop with a group of leaders, and one of them said, Rob, I can't even think 2 months ahead. I'm so busy managing the day to day. I said, well, that's why we're here, because we need to do something different from your leadership role to change the conditions in the organization where people start to self-lead more so that they become more reliant on each other and hold each other accountable and support each other so that you are not the person that's essentially the gatekeeper. In many instances, leaders don't realize this. They're the bottlenecks to the success in their systems
Mm-hmm.
because they're getting in the way. And so, one of the other things is, well, I don't want to, there's so much information, it's expensive to do this. And the response is, you get to do what you want with your organizations. We'd love to help make it easier for you. We believe that you're either going to pay for it now or you're going to pay for it later. And when I mean later, it might be a call to us to fix what's going on before it goes to trial, or it's you keep turning over teams and things like this, and you're losing money that way. Like, we are not born to be leaders necessarily. This are leaders nurtured or nature. The bottom line is that we don't even speak the same language. Let's just start there. That when we're on a team together, your definition of motivation is different than my definition. I'll guarantee that for every person in the system. if they haven't arrived at a common definition. And that's part of the reason why we talk about motivation in terms of what is it and what does it look like for us. And so people need the help. Why do we prioritize going to get a degree in whatever, whether it's marketing, engineering, computer science? And that's a criteria to get a job. But when we get to leadership levels, we don't have that same criteria there. And that's part of the reason why we have these challenges. We need to rebroker our resource system to develop leaders better, quicker, more effectively, and create space for them to have those development areas so that they're not feeling like their head's always down in the weeds, so that they actually are ready to get to the question that I asked you to pause on, so that they are ready to understand what their people need and how each person is somewhat different in what they need and how to work with them to kind of polish up that diamond and let them shine,
Sure.
relocate them, exit them. And for most of our teams we work with, we're not exiting many people. They're exiting themselves because they're not buying into the cultural aspirations of the organization and the team, which is a wonderful place to be, because when all of us are on the same team together, just think of a sports team, we're all holding each other accountable. I dropped the ball, I'm sorry, I'll work harder next time. There's this level of camaraderie and support that really, it creates this culture. And the culture to me is the grease in the gears. It's the grease in the cogs that make, if I have to have that conversation with someone, whether it's a feedback conversation or a difficult conversation, it makes it that much easier. Like if I'm having a conversation with you, Mike, because of something that you've done wrong, that culture, that relationship we have makes that conversation easier. Because I'm not going to say it's not going to sting when I call you out on something, but
Sure.
you also know that I'm calling you out because I got your back and I care for you. And that carries a lot of weight with organizations. And when we get back to retention, you know, interest to endorse the organization, identity and identifying with the organization and the team, all these beautiful engagement concepts that occur when you really are doing it well.
I love that, man. I in leadership and in business, I love sports analogies. And you picked up on a couple of things that are just, I've got to restate this. And there've been some times and it hits, right? One is, I wrote a blog this, gosh, 10 years ago now, something called The Coach Isn't in the Huddle. And the thing that we got to realize as leaders, when you're talking about, hey, you've got these guys or gals on the field, they're all being accountable to one another. They're holding one another accountable. It is way more powerful for anyone who's played team sports. And if you can transition that to business, it is more powerful to have that center that's on the line, that's playing their position, have the quarterback walk up and tap them and say, hey man, you've got to play your position and get the block because I'm getting my butt kicked over here, versus the coach, i.e. the leader, the business owner,
Yeah.
over on the side, throwing the clipboard down, screaming their name in vain, trying to get them to do the thing. Cause they're like, okay, I have this relationship and it's real. What's happening to you? I got it. And most of the time they're going to step up and pick up that play. So I love the fact that you hit on that. Also, as you're talking about, for example, motivation, because I had that circled to come back to, but we'd been down this path. This is just how my brain works, and my audience knows this. We'll end up
I
going
love
down a
it.
path,
I
and then I'm
love
like,
it.
oh wait, stop. We got to stop and ask this question. As you're talking about motivation, what is? Can you give me the definition? What is motivation? And I'm not talking textbook like dictionary definition. How do you, Rob Leone, define motivation?
I want to step back before the definition, because to some
Okay.
extent the definition is secondary.
Okay.
We've
That's fair.
historically talked about motivation as either intrinsic or extrinsic, right?
Mm-hmm.
Have we ever talked about it anything else? For the most part, no. Very
No.
binary, either
Right.
or. And the problem with that is that there's much more to it than that. There's things that actually fuel high levels of intrinsic motivation, and those are basic psychological needs. And those basic psychological needs are competency, autonomy, and relatedness. And deficiencies in any of them or any combination lead to diminished levels of motivation. This is what the problem is. There's two problems I have with how we talk about motivation in the workplace right now. And by the way, motivation is like number 5 on keynote leadership topics around the world. So it's, I worry that we're peddling the wrong information at times. You've probably been in an interview and they say, "Hey, Mike, how do you motivate a team?
Yeah, sure.
And how do you work with that?" Right? Like, so, because if you think about it in terms of internal or external, intrinsic or extrinsic, and if you enter this with the belief that I could create incentives, rewards, benefits, and you coming from the car industry, you know what commissions are. But most
Absolutely.
people don't have that ability, right? Most people are going to the job, say $36 an hour. They may get a cost of living bump. They might get a bonus if they're in that environment, which, by the way, half of organizations aren't in that environment, right? So, I've never seen a nonprofit or a government agency say, "Hey, look, we performed really well this year. Here's an extra 20,000 at the end, year end," right?
Sure.
So we really create this. We talk about motivation. We talk about talk, but if we have no discretion over influencing and manipulating extrinsic variables, then that one's off the table. So it comes down to this one. What's intrinsic? Well, intrinsic is this internal fuel to do the work out of the joy of doing the work. And then so now it's like, so Mike, how do you create that for others? And this is how do you motivate others? You can't put fuel in me,
Right.
right?
I
You
love
can
that answer.
cultivate it. You can cultivate it, and this is my belief, and this is what I teach my clients and my students. I cannot motivate anyone. By my definition and framework of motivation, I could only cultivate it. And so when we hear about motivational speakers, I don't like that language. I say inspirational. You can inspire people. You're not going to get people to move. Um, so we look at that. So now here's the challenge, right? So we have this binary framework of motivation, and this is why on our website we have 2 different models. They're both 4-factor motivation models
Okay.
because they range from intrinsic, aligned, imposed to extrinsic. So now all of a sudden, we have a 4-factor framework to start monitoring motivation in individuals. Now I got something I could work with here. I have 4 avenues to cultivate that motivation in you. All right. So, but let's step it back one more time. The other
Okay.
thing I believe in is that when we do a disservice when we talk about motivation in terms of interest. What motivates you, Mike? Well, I like working in teams. Okay, that's good, but that's a preference. And I've become really strict with my language because even though it does influence you and it will motivate you, I want to protect the term motivation to be tied to these basic psychological needs. And so the
Okay.
approach is motivation is a response, or our approach to motivation is a needs-based response. If someone's not performing, we need to get at that needs level, getting back to diagnostics. We need to move beyond the symptom. Well, they look like they're entitled. They look like they're lazy. They look like they're uninterested. Well, maybe that's because whatever the reason is, like if your staff member's house is being foreclosed, you think they really care about processing paper by the deadline? No, they're more concerned about the bank calling and dealing with that and figuring out where to find that money. Or so people have a variety of needs that are related to these competency, autonomy, and relatedness pieces that are both at work and at home, and they flow back and forth, right? And
Hmm.
so most of our work deficiencies probably can be tracked back to out of work deficiencies in terms of need
I would agree with that.
fulfillment. And so
I.
that's what we're trying to do is break it down to something that's bite sized. So
Mhm.
if you were one of my clients, like I have CEOs that I work with, they call it the bat phone. They could text me anytime they want. We could have quick conversations. Mike, you reach out to me, you're like, I don't know what to do with Fred. He's not performing. I'll say, let's check his car. Let's talk about his competency at work. Let's talk about it at home. Let's talk about his autonomy at work, home, relatedness, work, and home. And really quickly, we start to sort out what's influencing behavior at a really deep level. Because you could put a coffee maker in the break room because you believe it's going to create engagement, but it's just a gimmick, right? And so too much of the motivation talk in the workplace is I call it junk food motivation. And I really don't like saying that because there's a lot of smart people that made a lot of tools and things. But if there's so many tools out there that are looking at the wrong things, if you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, Those
Mhm.
tools are addressing things at a purpose level, at a higher social level than basic needs. Once we get through the basic needs, then we could talk about purpose, right? Think about yourself. I
Sure.
think me too. When we were young, our purpose wasn't important at 21. It was to make money, to stabilize ourselves, to
Yep.
go out on dates, to pay for gas for a car. You know what I
Get a
mean? Like
car, get
to
some
be
spending money. Yep.
independent. And so, I might ruffle some feathers the wrong way here, but these purpose workshops, they have their place, but we also have to be mindful that your entire staff might not be there, right? I had a little dispute with a in a workshop with a woman that's like, it's all about purpose. That's what we all need to have. I said, that's really convenient for you to say as the CEO. I was like, you don't have to worry about, maybe you do, but like you're at the top of the food chain. It goes back to what you said earlier, Mike. When you have a good idea, and I know this is going to work,
Hmm.
we have to be mindful that other people don't process opportunity and interest the same way we do. So because of that, we might be creating distance with people and lowering levels of psychological safety because now I don't feel like I'm on the same page as Mike, and now I'm not going to speak up anymore. And now we're going to have this downward spiral there, right? So it's really important for, I think, leaders to be humble and have humility and to be humanists, to recognize that I don't know what's going on in people's minds. I know my life's a mess every once in a while. And if my life's a mess every once in a while, I'm sure other people's lives are a mess. I need to give them grace. And then I
Oh
figure
man.
out how we work together to make this work.
The
Squishy, right?
what's that?
Squishy. Once again, squishy
It,
stuff.
it
Not
it
for
doesn't it
everyone.
doesn't matter. I love the squishy stuffs. You know, sometimes, yeah,
Yeah.
and like as leaders, yeah, we got to have that black and white. We got to get to our KPIs and so forth. But I think this is powerful because like the question is, okay, well, how do you define motivation? Like, what is motivation? It wasn't. And I love the fact that you took that torch and just ran all the way down with it because it's not about oh, how do you motivate people?
Right.
And I've said that before, and that I will tell you why I love when I've tried to distill that down. And I'm always curious of how people's answers are and how the overlap is. But it's like motivation is need, right? Now, the next part, and I would encourage, for goodness sake, if you're listening to this podcast, or obviously you are, if you're listening at this point, write this down, right? Check their car,
Yeah.
competency, autonomy, and relationship. You said check the car, which I
Yeah.
can relate to totally, right? Check their car. And then it is about work and home. We get so bound up in, well, like you said, oh, well, this person's lazy or they're not doing the job right and so forth. Especially if it's somebody that's normally performing in an area,
Yeah.
it is not about the job at that point.
Right.
It never is.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
a couple of things here. As a reminder for anybody that's watching or listening, make sure check out Rob's website. Dr. Rob Leone. Go to Black River PM. That stands for Performance Management. BlackRiverPM.com/Rob. He's been kind enough to share his email. You can email him, rob@blackriverpm.com. You can connect on LinkedIn. One thing I definitely want to get to before we go today, and it's so funny how compressed time gets when I'm
Yeah.
involved in some of these just phenomenal conversations. And so, God bless you. Thank you for all of the time you've invested and everything you've shared. It's just been phenomenal. One thing you brought up that you do in addition to workshops, and this is sort of serves that, hey, how's the competency, autonomy, how's the relationship at work and home? One
Yeah.
of the things that we were chatting beforehand was talking about sort of these couples workshops and retreats that
Yeah.
you're getting into. Can you
Yeah.
expand on that? And I'm going to put this on the screen because one of the
Yeah.
things Rob shared with me, he says that he's getting into doing couples workshops and retreats with your wife, right?
Yeah.
And they've got a website for this. It's theydo.net, like I do, right?
Yeah.
Theydo.net.
Exactly.
I picked up on it
Good.
for
Thank you.
workshops and retreats. So can you expand on that a little bit? Because I think that family piece really feeds into business.
Yeah, so let's back it up to the inception of this. So I've
Absolutely.
been doing my gigs for years, working with clients and different stuff. I just so happened to have one CEO and business owner in one of the sessions once, and afterwards he's like, "Rob, you need to come and do this for my family." And what we were doing is we were doing a variety of different personality assessments to look at behavior and communication preferences, how people approach things, stuff like that. And I said, sure, let's do it. And so that was kind of the launch of this. And the idea is that, look, our families, our relationships with people outside of work are some of the most critical things for many people. And for this person in particular, that was the impetus for this. This is what made the difference. And if you go onto the website, you'll see testimonials on it that I couldn't even dream of receiving such positive testimonials. The idea here is that we're working with families,
Hmm.
including extended families. We're doing this in friend groups. We do retreats out of country. We take our concept and we will travel to do this where people want to do this.
It's
And
amazing.
and the idea is improving rapport and connection and relatedness with people that you choose to spend your time with, right? So if you have a couple, if there's 10 couples that want to go down and go to a facility that we have access to in the Dominican, we can do this. Or whether I'll be down in 2 weeks in Mexico doing a different type of retreat setting. Um, so we'll do couples, we'll do families, and then we'll actually do friend groups too that just want to enhance who they are, right? There's some of us out there that just get geeked out by podcasts and learning more about myself and self-development. And that's what we're playing in. We're playing in that space to give people the tools to love better in many instances and to understand themselves. As I mentioned earlier, we don't have a common language for a lot of stuff. Like if
Hmm.
you're an engineer and you went to engineering school, you all have that same jargon. If you're a marketer and you went to marketing school, you have that same jargon. As it relates, like I mentioned, motivation, communication, all these things, we all approach it differently. And while we know ourselves pretty well, we're not so good at articulating ourselves. And so we feel it in our heart, we know it in our mind, but what we're doing is giving tools and perspectives and frameworks to help people understand. So we could actually do side by side comparisons with couples to show them where their kind of incongruences with respect to behaviors and communication that's creating friction in their relationship. So I'll give you a personal example. My wife, Angie, we're business partners. We are so different in terms of certain aspects of our personality that if we didn't have these tools, we'd never be together. And we talk about that because we have these tools and we know the science behind it. It's allowed us to actually love each other better.
Hmm.
But the other side of it is if we would have known this 25 years ago, we might have had different trajectories in our first relationships. You know what I mean? So we bring that to the conversation because a lot of people can connect with like, hey, I love this person, I just can't stand this person. And so let's look at what that means and let's unpack that and let's bring you back to the things that like we're not counselors, we're pragmatists in many instances. Like these are
Sure.
practical approaches to work through this, right? Cheaper than divorce. That's how I think about it, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think it's interesting. You talk about some of these immeasurables or the things that are unique to us, motivation, communicate, like
Yeah,
how we communicate is different. I
yeah,
agree with you. If I'd known how to communicate 20 years ago or 30 years ago the same way, or if I shouldn't say if I'd known how to communicate, if I knew the same things about communication
yeah,
as I do now, does it
yeah,
create a different trajectory? So I love that. One of the things I was gonna bring up, and so I would encourage people definitely go check that out as well. And you do. I had glanced at the website. You've got some phenomenal testimonials on stuff on there. So
thank you.
I would say go check out they do theydo.net as well. Um, for anyone listening, the one of the things you brought up earlier, and I think this applies both to business and family, is like, well, hey, if somebody's an engineer and they speak engineering language, or a marketer and they speak marketing language, and so forth, and you were talking about leaders, and we said we don't put that same emphasis uh, of training, I guess, onto leaders, and we don't put the same emphasis onto families and relationships, right? People look and go, like when you think about this, they'll go, oh man, they're a great engineer, so we should make them a manager, and it's like,
Yeah,
what? Why? Whether they're good at being an engineer, or you've had people say this. I know I've had people say this to me, like, oh my god, when I was a much younger man, oh, you're going to be a great dad. Why? What makes you say that? What are the characteristics? What are the
Right.
measurements that are going to do that? And then when you get into that role, it's like, holy cow, I didn't know I was signing up for this. So
Exactly.
I think all of the things that you're doing, both in the leadership and consulting and coaching side, as well as then the relationship, or the leading relationships coaching and
Yeah.
consulting side, just phenomenal. As we're coming to the tail end here, Rob, any sort of final thoughts or final points to take us out today on the
It,
leadership toolkit?
it, I guess I really want to be clear that what I believe is that everyone's trying to do the best, whether it's a
Hmm.
parent or an employee, a leader. It's just that the intention is there. Sometimes the skills aren't there, or the space isn't there for them to really shine. And so that's how it's really interesting. We really try to normalize that when we work with groups, because now all of a sudden they have a little bit more grace for each other. We try to help people understand that others are in it for the same reasons that you are, good and bad, right? And so we think it humanizes the approach to recognize, once again, like as I mentioned, as the leader, you see the world a little bit differently than your employees, and
Sure.
um, and their needs are not going to be the same as yours. So we're really trying to bring people around to this. The other thing I would say too, just to wrap it up, is that on our models page we have
Hmm.
4 tenets, and our tenets are really about reorientating people's perspectives away from a lot of kind of not helpful historical rhetoric around leadership. So one of the is that our first tenet is vulnerability does not equal weakness, right? Because we
Absolutely.
know that in order to create relationships, intimate relationships, friends, we have to be vulnerable, right? And so there's a couple of those in there. The idea is just really, this other concept, perception is not reality. We grew up with those lessons that perception is reality.
Right, right.
Well, it's I know what you mean there, and we're trying to help people better understand and become more other centered with that. But the reality is, if I'm gone tomorrow, the world continues on, and there's something sobering to that. I'm
Hmm.
just a small piece in this. I'm just a small speck in this whole experiment we have, right?
Absolutely love it, man. I love those final thoughts. So,
Thank you.
Rob, thank you so much for making the time to share with the Leadership Toolkit audience, and thank you for having the conversation with me. I always am so blessed to be able to have these conversations. I feel like I grow as much as I know I want everybody else to learn and listen and share those things with others. So, if you would hang out for just a moment, and I'm going to take us out real
Absolutely.
quick, okay? So, ladies and gentlemen, that is going to bring us to a close for another episode of the Leadership Toolkit with Dr. Rob Leone. Again, I encourage you, go and connect with him, whether it's through email, looking at LinkedIn. Check out his website. They have got so much phenomenal information on the website as far as the development and where science meets business and all of these different pieces. The blog and podcast. I think Leader You is their podcast. I mean, just such a wealth of information. So I can't say thank you enough to Dr. Rob Leone for joining me today. Do me a favor, for everybody that is listening and watching, one of the best things you can do to help this show grow and so that we can get more leadership and love out there into the universe is just share the show, right? Throw some thumbs up on it, share it on your platforms if you would. And most importantly, if you know somebody that would grow and gain from this conversation that you listened to today, share it with them specifically. Say, hey, I listened to this, and man, they touched on some good points, and it's fantastic. I mean, one of the best things is, and how I took it as Rob was closing us out there, is like, people want to do well. People are just doing the best with what they've got. And from a leadership perspective, it's like, how can I give them more of that? How can I help them and grow them and give them more of what they've already got to enhance that? So I just, really great show. Thank you everybody for taking the time to tune in with me today. And I would encourage you, like I said, share it with somebody that'll grow from it. I'll see you next Wednesday. And until we speak next, stay great. We'll talk soon, everybody.